Thorn Blackwell stood in the shadows, watching as the elves passed by, their silver cloaks shimmering in the light of the setting sun. It was always the same, elegant, tall, and full of arrogance. Their eyes, glowing with ancient magic, merely glanced at the humans around them. To them, humans were little more than tools, meant for labor for work, nothing more. As he stood in the quiet alley of the elfin city, Thorn's thoughts were dark. His sister Lena had been taken by the elven soldiers only days ago. She had dared to speak against their laws, and for that, she had paid the price. The elves had no mercy. Thorn could still hear the cold words of the elven captain in his mind. Humans do not defy us. The city of Alarith, with its towering spires and glowing walls, was beautiful, but to Thorn, it was a prison. A prison where the humans had been enslaved for centuries, treated as less than dirt by the very beings they had once shared the world with. It was a city built on pride and power, power the humans had never been allowed to touch. Thorn clenched his fists. He had seen enough. His sister's death had been the final straw. For years, the humans had been patient. They had worked the fields, mined the mountains, built the cities, all for the elves, with nothing in return but disdain. They had been forced to bow to their masters, made to believe they were nothing more than servants in the grand plan of the elven people. But now, something had changed. Thorn had spent weeks, maybe months, listening to whispers in the dark corners of human villages. There were rumors of a hidden power, a way to break free of the elves' control. And there were those who were willing to fight, people who, like him, had seen enough of the cruelty. The elves were powerful, yes, but their pride, their belief that they were untouchable, could be their downfall. Thorn's thoughts turned to the crown of Alarith, the ancient artifact that the elves believed to be just a myth. It was said to hold the power to control the very forces of nature. If it existed, it was their only hope. The elves had spent centuries keeping it hidden, but rumors said that it was real, buried deep within the heart of the elven kingdom, guarded by magic more powerful than anything the humans had ever seen. Thorn knew the path ahead would be dangerous. The elves would never let them take the crown. They would fight to the last to keep their power intact. But Thorn had made a promise. He would do whatever it took to bring justice, to end the tyranny the elves had imposed on his people. He turned away from the city and headed back to his camp. It was time to gather those who would stand with him. The fight was just beginning. And this time, the humans would no longer be the ones to bow. The night was quiet, the air cool and still. Thorn sat by the fire, his mind racing. He had gathered a small group of rebels, each one with their own reasons for wanting to fight the elves. Some had lost family members, others had been mistreated or forced to serve in the elven army. But now, they all shared the same goal, to strike back. As the fire crackled, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Era, a sharp-eyed woman who had once been a scout for the elven army before turning her back on them. She had been the one to first speak of the legend, the story of an ancient elven artifact called the Crown of Alarith. Thorn had heard the name before in hushed whispers among the older humans. It was said to be more than just a crown. Some believed it held the power to control the forces of nature, to bend the world to the will of its wearer. If it was real, it could give the humans the power they needed to challenge the elves once and for all. Do you really believe it's out there? Thorn asked Era, his voice low. The Crown of Alarith? Era nodded, her face serious. I've seen the signs. There are stories, old and forgotten, that speak of its existence. The elves have tried to bury the truth, but it's there, hidden deep within their kingdom. The crown is said to be in a place so sacred that even the elves themselves dare not speak of it. Thorn's heart raced. This was the chance he had been waiting for. If they could find the crown, they could change everything. The elves would no longer be the ones in control, but the path wouldn't be easy. The elven kingdom was vast, and the crown was protected by magic stronger than anything the humans had ever seen. Getting there would be a battle in itself. We'll need a plan, Thorn said, standing up. And we'll need more people. If the elves truly believe the crown is just a myth, they won't expect us to try and take it. But once we get close, they'll know we're coming. We'll need to move quickly. Era's eyes narrowed. We'll need to strike from the shadows. The elves are too proud to think a human army could get that close. We'll have to use our wits, our knowledge of their ways. The elves are powerful, but they're also blinded by their own arrogance. They think we're weak, that we can't challenge them. We'll use that against them. Thorn looked around at the small group gathered around the fire. He knew the risks. If they fail, the elves would destroy them, just like they had destroyed so many others. But if they succeeded, they would change the course of history. We start tomorrow, Thorn said. Gather the others. It's time to show the elves what humans are really capable of. As the fire flickered and the night grew colder, Thorn felt a strange sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and unknowns. But he had a feeling that this time, the humans would not be the ones to kneel. They would rise, and with the crown, they would reclaim what was rightfully theirs. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale light over the elven city of Alarith. The streets were empty now, save for the patrols of elven soldiers who moved silently through the shadows. Thorn and his small group of rebels crouched in the darkness, watching from a hidden alleyway as the elves passed by, their glowing eyes scanning the area. They were everywhere, and they were watching. Thorn's heart pounded, but he knew this was their moment. He glanced over at his companions, Era, with her sharp eyes always alert, Kian, a former blacksmith whose strength had been a great asset, and Marek, a skilled thief who had once lived in the city and knew its every corner. Each one of them had their own reason for being here, but now they were united in one cause, to take the fight to the elves. They think they own this city, Thorn whispered, his voice barely audible. But they're too proud. They think we can't touch them. Era nodded, her eyes hard with determination. That's our advantage. They've grown so sure of their power that they've forgotten how to truly watch for threats. They think we're nothing more than a nuisance, and that makes us dangerous. Thorn couldn't help but agree. The elves had always seen humans as inferior, and they were right, in some ways. Humans didn't live as long, their bodies weren't as strong, and they didn't wield magic the way the elves did. But what the elves didn't understand was that humans had something more: determination. When they were pushed to the edge, when they had nothing left to lose, humans fought harder than anyone could imagine. And that, Thorn believed, was exactly what would win this war. The plan was simple, though dangerous. They would slip into the heart of Alarith right under the noses of the elves and steal what they needed: information, weapons, anything that could help them get closer to the crown of Alarith. They knew the elves wouldn't see them coming. The elven nobles had never bothered to train the humans in stealth, always assuming that brute strength and magic were enough to hold control. The humans, however, had learned to fight in the shadows, using their minds as much as their weapons. Marek led the way, moving with the grace of someone who had once called these streets home. They followed him through narrow, twisting alleys, avoiding the main roads where elven soldiers were sure to be. The city was built like a maze, a web of ancient stone and towering trees that the elves had long since learned to navigate. But the humans, they had learned to survive by doing the unexpected. And today, the unexpected was their greatest strength. As they approached the market square, Thorn held up his hand to stop the group. He could see two elven guards standing near the entrance of a building, their eyes scanning the area lazily. They weren't expecting anyone to sneak past them. We'll have to move fast, Thorn murmured. Irakian, take the left side. Marek and I will go right. Stay quiet. The plan was set. Thorn's mind raced as he watched the guards, waiting for the perfect moment. The elves had no reason to believe that humans could infiltrate their kingdom without being caught, but that was their mistake. They had underestimated the humans, and that, Thorn knew, would be their downfall. With a deep breath, Thorn signaled the others. The group moved swiftly, like shadows in the night, And as the elven guards turned their heads in the opposite direction, Thorn and his companions slid past unnoticed. They were in the heart of the city now, and there was no turning back. Thorn felt a surge of hope. They were on the right path, and this time, it was the humans who would have the last laugh. The night had fallen silent, but the air in the elven palace was thick with tension. Queen Feloria sat in her grand hall, her cold eyes scanning the reports of unrest that had reached her from every corner of the kingdom. The humans, once meek and obedient, had begun to rise. At first, it had seemed like nothing more than small acts of defiance, easily dealt with. But now, they were growing bolder. How could this happen? Queen Feloria's voice was sharp, her words cutting through the stillness of the room. We are the elves, the rulers of this land. Why are they fighting back now? A tall figure stood before her, General Alaric, the commander of the elven army. His expression was serious, but he dared not meet the queen's eyes. He knew the dangers of angering her. They are led by a human soldier, my queen, General Alaric said, his voice steady. A man named Thorn Blackwell. He has gathered others, trained them, and is now striking at our supply lines. We believe they are searching for something important. Feloria's face twisted with fury. A soldier, a mere human soldier dares to challenge us. What is it they seek? The crown of Alarith, Alaric replied, his voice faltering slightly. It is said that they believe the crown will give them power to overthrow us. They are searching for it, my queen. The mention of the crown caused a flicker of uncertainty in Feloria's eyes. The elves had long ago hidden the crown, believing it was nothing but a legend. But the humans were not as ignorant as they thought. Thorn's group was persistent, and now they were growing more dangerous with each passing day. This cannot be allowed, Feloria said, her voice ice cold. Prepare the army. We will find these rebels, and we will crush them. If they think they can challenge us, they will learn their mistake. Her words sent a ripple of fear through the room, but the general did not hesitate. At once, my queen, we will leave no stone unturned. As Alaric left to prepare the army, Feloria turned to look out the large window of her throne room, staring into the darkness. Her mind raced with thoughts of what might happen if the humans found the crown. The very thought of it was enough to drive her to the brink of madness. The elves had been rulers of this world for so long, and the idea that a mere human could bring them down was a thought she could not bear. But deep down, she knew something else. The humans had not risen by chance. There was something about them that was different, something they had always overlooked. It was not just their strength or their cunning. It was their refusal to be controlled, their refusal to stay beneath the elves' heel. Feloria clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. We will make an example of them, she muttered to herself. We will show them who rules this world. The tension in the palace was palpable, but it was nothing compared to what was coming. The elven army would soon march, and the humans would face the full force of their fury. Thorn and his rebels had no idea how powerful the elves truly were, but Feloria intended to teach them. And if it took everything, she would ensure that no human would ever dare to rise against her again. Thorn and his small group of rebels had made their first move, but now the elves would make theirs, and the queen would make sure it would be their last. The days passed quickly as Thorn's small group moved deeper into the heart of Alarith. They had avoided most of the patrols and secured a hidden passage into the Elven Palace. Thanks to Murric's knowledge of the city, it wasn't much, but it was enough. The walls of the palace loomed ahead, tall and covered in vines that glistened in the pale moonlight. This is it, Thorn whispered, his voice low but steady. We're almost there. Hera, Kian, and Murric stood close, all their eyes focused on the towering gates ahead. They had come so far and faced so many dangers just to get to this point. Every step had been calculated, every movement deliberate. Now it was time to act. They moved forward cautiously, staying out of sight of the guards patrolling the walls. The air was thick with tension. Thorn could feel the weight of their mission pressing on him. They weren't just fighting for their own freedom. They were fighting for the future of all humans. If they fail, the elves would crush them. But if they succeeded, the balance of power would change forever. Inside the palace, the elves were already preparing for war. Queen Feloria had gathered her most loyal soldiers, and the word had spread fast. The humans were coming. The queen's orders were clear. No mercy. The elves would stop at nothing to protect their power. Thorn's group reached the grand hall of the palace, where the ancient architecture rose high above them. The hall was empty, save for a few scattered statues and candles that flickered in the cold air. They moved quickly, staying low and avoiding any chance of being seen. "We need to get to the central chamber," Era said, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. "That's where the crown is hidden. The elves won't expect us to go straight for it, but we don't have much time." Thorn nodded, his grip tightening on the hilt of his sword. The crown was their only hope. It was said to be more powerful than any magic the elves had ever wielded. If they could get their hands on it, they could turn the tide of the war in their favor. But it wasn't just the crown they needed to worry about. The elves were cunning, and they wouldn't hesitate to strike when the time was right. As they moved deeper into the palace, the sound of footsteps echoed through the halls. Thorn held up his hand, signaling for everyone to stop. He could hear the faint voices of elven soldiers talking in the distance. "They're getting closer," Kian whispered. "We can't afford to be caught now." Thorn's mind raced. They couldn't let fear stop them. They had come too far to turn back now. The humans had always been underestimated, looked down upon. But in that moment, Thorn realized something. They had something the elves didn't. They had the courage to fight, even when the odds were against them. "We push forward," Thorn said, his voice firm. "We can do this. For all the people who have suffered under their rule, we do this." With renewed determination, the group continued their journey through the palace. They moved quickly and quietly, relying on the skills they had learned over the years. Every step brought them closer to the heart of the Elven Kingdom and the crown of Alarith. But as they rounded the corner, they were met with a sight that stopped them in their tracks. The door to the central chamber stood wide open, and inside, a small group of elven soldiers waited, their eyes locked onto the intruders. The trap had been set. The sudden sight of the elven soldiers made Thorn's heart skip a beat. There, standing in the middle of the central chamber, were 4 elves, their eyes glowing with the eerie light of their magic. They weren't just any soldiers. They were the elite, trained to defend the most sacred parts of the palace. "Stay calm," Thorn whispered, his voice barely audible. "We can't panic now." Era, Kian, and Murek nodded, each one gripping their weapons tightly. They were outnumbered, but they had the advantage of surprise. For a moment, everything stood still, the quiet tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. The elves had clearly not expected an attack, but now that they saw the humans, their eyes narrowed with deadly intent. One of the elven soldiers, taller and more imposing than the rest, stepped forward, his sword drawn and glowing with ancient magic. "So, the humans finally dare to enter our kingdom," he said, his voice cold. "Do you truly think you can steal from us without consequences?" Thorn stood firm, his heart pounding but his mind clear. He knew this was the moment of truth. "We came for the crown," he said, his voice steady. "And we will take it, no matter what." The elven soldier sneered. "Foolish humans," he muttered, and with a swift motion, he raised his sword. The other soldiers followed his lead, their eyes burning with anger and magic. The first strike came fast, as the elves moved with supernatural speed. Thorn barely managed to block the attack, his sword meeting the elven blade with a loud clang. The force of the blow nearly sent him off balance, but he regained his footing quickly. Merrick and Kian moved to intercept the other soldiers, their own weapons flashing in the dim light. Era, agile and swift, darted to the side, looking for an opening. The clash of steel rang out through the chamber as the battle began in earnest. Thorn's muscles burned as he fought, each strike pushing him further, but his determination kept him focused. He couldn't allow the elves to win. Not now. The elven soldier in front of him pressed forward, his movements swift and precise. Thorn could feel the weight of his magic, the air growing heavy with every swing. But he didn't back down. With a quick twist of his wrist, Thorn deflected the soldier's blow and aimed for his opponent's side. The soldier parried the strike, but Thorn wasn't finished. He feigned a second attack, then ducked low and swung upward, catching the elf off guard. His sword connected with the soldier's armor, sending him stumbling back. "Move!" Era shouted from across the room, her voice filled with urgency. Thorn turned just in time to see the other elven soldiers closing in on Kian and Marek. Kian had already knocked one of them off balance, but another was closing in on him with a flurry of attacks. Marek darted to the side, narrowly avoiding a magical blast, but he wasn't fast enough to escape a quick slash. "We have to get to the crown," Thorn shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. He knew the elves wouldn't give up easily, but they couldn't let this fight hold them back. The crown was their only chance to turn the tide of the war. Thorn gathered every ounce of his strength and charged forward, pushing through the battle, his eyes fixed on the doorway that led deeper into the chamber. The elven soldier who had been facing him snarled, his magic flaring. But Thorn, with his eyes locked on the prize, wasn't stopping now. This time, he would not fail. He had already come too far. "Cover me," Thorn shouted, hoping his companions could hold off the elves long enough for him to reach the crown. The fight raged on, but Thorn pushed forward, determined to finish what he had started. The sound of clashing steel echoed through the grand chamber as Thorn pressed forward, his every step filled with purpose. His eyes were fixed on the prize, the pedestal at the center of the room, where the crown of Alarith sat waiting, bathed in an ethereal glow. The battle raged around him, but the crown was his focus now. "Thorn, wait!" Era shouted, her voice tinged with concern as she blocked an incoming strike from one of the elven soldiers. She was holding her ground, but the sheer power of the elves was overwhelming. "Cover me," Thorn shouted back, his voice urgent. He couldn't stop now, not when they were so close. The fate of the rebellion rested on what he would do next. He was just a few steps away from the crown, but the elven soldiers weren't far behind. The tall soldier who had spoken earlier was already recovering, his eyes glowing brighter with fury. With a flick of his wrist, he sent a wave of magic crashing toward Thorn, the air growing heavy with energy. Thorn dodged, barely avoiding the blast. He could feel the heat of the magic as it passed by him, scorching the air. His heart raced, but he didn't stop. This was his chance. With a roar, the elven soldier lunged at him, sword raised high. Thorn raised his own weapon, ready to block, but before the blow could land, Marek appeared out of nowhere, his dagger flashing in the dim light. The soldier staggered back, caught off guard by Marek's sudden attack. "Go!" Marek yelled, his voice rough. "We'll hold them off." Thorn didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted the final distance to the pedestal and reached out, his hand trembling as he touched the crown of Alarith. The instant his fingers made contact with the ancient artifact, a wave of energy surged through his body, and a brilliant light filled the room. The magic was overwhelming, unlike anything he had ever felt. It was as if the very essence of the kingdom itself had awakened. For a brief moment, Thorn stood still, letting the power of the crown course through him. He could feel the weight of history, of all the centuries the elves had ruled with their pride and arrogance. But now, the balance was shifting. The power of the humans, the ones who had been suppressed and underestimated for so long, was rising. "Thorn," Era shouted, her voice desperate. "Get out of there now." Thorn snapped back to reality. The elven soldiers were closing in, their magic and blades at the ready. He didn't have much time. With the crown now in his grasp, Thorn turned to face the rest of the room. He knew they couldn't stay here. They had to escape before the elves could regroup and trap them. His heart pounded as he ran back toward his companions, the weight of the crown in his hands feeling both heavy and empowering. The elven soldier who had been closest to him lunged again, but this time Thorn was ready. With a swift motion, he parried the attack and pushed the soldier back with a powerful strike. The elven soldier stumbled, momentarily dazed. Thorn didn't hesitate. He turned and made his way toward Era and Kian, the crown clutched tightly in his hands. "We're leaving," Thorn shouted. "We've got what we came for." The group was already moving, fighting their way through the remaining elven soldiers, but the path to escape wasn't easy. The elves were closing in fast, and the sound of their footsteps filled the air like thunder. But Thorn knew they had the power to change everything now. With the crown, they were no longer the underdogs. They were no longer powerless. "We need to get to the exit," Era shouted, her voice strained but determined. With the crown still glowing in his hands, Thorn pushed forward, his heart set on the future. The elves might have had centuries of power, but now it was the humans' turn. They would fight. They would rise, and nothing would stop them from claiming their place in this world. The night sky above the Elven kingdom was heavy with smoke and fire. The sound of horns echoed through the valley as Thorn and his group rushed down the stone path behind the palace. Every step was followed by the angry cries of Elven guards. The humans had taken the crown of Alarith. The one thing the elves thought no one would ever dare to touch was now in human hands. Thorn held the crown tightly. Its light had dimmed, but the power still pulsed through it. Every heartbeat felt stronger, every breath clearer. His arms ached from the fight, but he kept moving. Beside him, Era and Kian helped Merrick, who had been wounded during their escape. Blood marked his side, but he didn't complain. He just gritted his teeth and ran. "This way," shouted Era, pointing to a hidden tunnel covered in vines. "We'll lose them in the forest." They rushed inside just as another blast of magic struck the ground behind them. Stones cracked, and dust filled the air. Thorn didn't look back. He knew Queen Feloria would stop at nothing to take back the crown. She would send her full army if needed. But he also knew they had done something no one thought possible. They had stolen from the heart of the elves. They had won a battle that wasn't just about weapons. It was about belief. The tunnel opened into the woods, dark and quiet under the night sky. The group didn't stop until they were deep within the trees. Only then did Thorn fall to his knees, breathing hard. Merrick sat beside him, leaning against a tree. Kian stood watch while Era checked the map. "We're close to the human camps," she said. "If we keep moving, we can reach them by morning." Thorn looked at the crown in his hands. It was smooth and cold, made of silver and stone, with strange writing carved along its edges. "We did it," he said quietly. "You did it," Merrick replied. "You showed them we're not weak." Thorn shook his head. "We all did. Every one of us. And this?" He lifted the crown slightly. "This is just the beginning." The wind stirred the leaves above them, and in the distance, the sound of more horns faded into silence. The elves were regrouping, but so were the humans. News of the crown's capture would spread quickly. And for the first time in years, the humans would have hope. As the first light of dawn touched the treetops, Thorn stood. He was tired, bruised, and covered in dirt, but his eyes were steady. "We'll go to the camps," he said. "We'll show them the crown. We'll gather more fighters. And when the elves come again, we won't just run." Era stepped forward, her voice clear. "We'll be ready." Thorn nodded. The fight was far from over. The road ahead would be hard, filled with danger and doubt. But now, the humans had something they hadn't had in a long time: belief. And that was stronger than any magic the elves could throw at them.